Every summer, the images look exactly the same. The breaking news banners flash across our screens, warning of historic, unstoppable walls of flame. We watch entire towns vanish in a single afternoon, while thousands of people flee down glowing highways. On the ground, fleets of modern fire engines and thousands of elite firefighters launch aggressive high-tech assaults. Yet year after year, the fires only seem to grow larger, hotter, and faster than before. We are told this is the new normal, a direct result of a rapidly warming planet. But the deeper truth is far more unsettling. Many forests are burning uncontrollably today. Specifically because for over a century, we didn't let them burn enough. To understand why the wilderness has turned against us, we have to look past the flames and see the invisible management system that we spent 100 years building. For millions of years, fire wasn't an enemy to the forest. It was its janitor. Ecosystems thrived on regular, low-intensity burns triggered by lightning strikes. These frequent small fires quietly drifted through the undergrowth, acting as a natural cleaning mechanism. They cleared out the dry grass, consumed fallen branches, and thinned out weak, crowded saplings. By sweeping the floor clean every few years, these natural disruptions recycled vital nutrients back into the soil. Most importantly, they kept the total amount of burnable fuel on the ground at a permanently low level. Without massive piles of debris to feed on, a fire simply couldn't climb up into the treetops. It was a self-regulating system that kept the entire landscape balanced, healthy, and safe. But then, modern civilization arrived with a completely different set of priorities. As towns expanded, railroads pushed west, and timber became the literal foundation of the economy. Any sign of smoke was viewed as an immediate, catastrophic threat to human progress. If a fire burned down a valley, it destroyed homes, ruined crops, and wiped out millions of dollars in lumber. So, governments around the world made a logical, decisive choice: declare total war on fire. In the United States, this crystallized into a strict mandate known colloquially as the 10 a.m. policy. The rule was simple: every single fire reported had to be completely extinguished by the next morning. For decades, this strategy looked like an absolute, undeniable triumph of human engineering. Communities expanded safely, timber production boomed, and the forests remained beautifully green. But here is the first hidden paradox of our intervention. The healthier, greener, and more beautiful we made these forests look, the more dangerous they secretly became. By putting out every minor ignition, we broke the natural cycle of regular housekeeping. The dead wood that should have burned safely in 1940 didn't go away. It stayed right there on the ground. The fallen branches of 1960 and the thick brush of 1980 piled up right on top of it. Without small fires to thin them out, millions of new trees sprouted in spaces that used to be wide open. Forests that once held 50 trees per acre suddenly packed in hundreds of tight, competing trunks. Now consider the mechanics of how a fire actually travels. Usually, a low-intensity fire stays on the floor because there is a physical gap between the dirt and the branches. But as we suppressed fires, young shrubs and small trees filled that gap, acting as a fuel ladder. Once a spark catches, the flame climbs this ladder, escaping the damp ground and leaping into the crowns of the tallest trees. When fire reaches the canopy, it undergoes a fundamental transformation. It becomes a crown fire. On the forest floor, fire moves slowly. In the canopy, wind carries it through the treetops like a freight train. By now, the forest had already become a giant fuel tank. Climate change didn't build that tank. It simply made sure it stayed dry. Hotter summers, prolonged droughts, and earlier spring snowmelts began draining the moisture out of the landscape. Relative humidity dropped, while stronger, shifting wind patterns began sweeping across dry regions. But here's what most people miss. All of this weather stress wouldn't matter unless the forest already had something massive waiting to burn. It is the physical equivalent of stacking dry firewood in a warehouse for 50 years and then turning on a giant heater. The heat doesn't cause the fire, but it ensures that when a spark finally happens, the environment is ready to explode. And that brings us to the final breaking point of the system, the firefighting network itself. Modern emergency response evolved to fight regular fires by surrounding them and cutting off their growth. But when a fire encounters this much accumulated fuel, the rules of physics shift entirely. It consumes so much energy so quickly that it begins to generate its own terrifying weather patterns. Updrafts launch millions of burning embers miles ahead of the main front, bypassing every barrier we build. Water drops evaporate in midair, bulldozed lines are casually jumped, and direct attacks become deadly for crews. At this point, we are no longer fighting flames. We are fighting thermodynamics. We often say firefighters are losing the battle against these mega fires. But that isn't really true. The battle was already lost, decades before the first spark was even struck. Realizing this has forced us into a massive, quiet redesign of how civilization operates. For generations, the boundary between nature and human cities was treated as a hard, permanent line. We built houses directly against the wilderness, assuming we could simply defend them when the time came. But now, the entire physical layout of these communities is being forced to adapt. Today, planners are designing defensible space, deliberate, non-flammable buffer zones around cities. We are replacing wood siding and asphalt shingles with non-combustible materials like metal, concrete, and tempered glass. Even the way we build ventilation vents is changing to prevent those wind-blown embers from slipping into attics. Yet the hardest part of this transition isn't engineering, it's social. To clear out decades of accumulated fuel, we must intentionally set prescribed burns during the cooler months. But this means communities must learn to tolerate smoke in the off-season, which often sparks heavy public pushback. We are learning that a small amount of smoke today is the insurance premium we pay to avoid catastrophic smoke tomorrow. We are also returning to ancient land management techniques practiced by indigenous communities for thousands of years. These traditions treat fire not as an invading enemy to be crushed, but as a cultural tool to maintain balance. The fundamental goal of modern forestry is shifting away from the impossible dream of eliminating all smoke. The new goal is to reintroduce small, gentle fires on our own terms before nature forces a catastrophic one upon us. Because the ultimate truth of this crisis extends far beyond the edges of our burning forests. This was never really a story about wildfires. It was a story about maintenance. Civilization often believes that eliminating every small disruption is the path to ultimate stability. But forests aren't unique. Many complex systems fail for this exact same reason. When we suppress all minor fluctuations, we simply bottle up the pressure, ensuring that the eventual breakdown is catastrophic. Healthy systems survive not because they are perfectly insulated from stress, but because they are constantly allowed to reset themselves in small, manageable ways. The forests were never asking us to stop the fire. They were asking us to understand how they stay alive.